The night was heavy with rain as the young woman was dragged through the gates of the naval compound, the guards on each side gripping her arms as if she were some dangerous criminal, her boots splashing against the wet ground as she stumbled forward. Her eyes steady and calm despite the insults hurled at her by the men who believed they had caught a liar. They called her a pretender, a fraud, a disgrace who dared to wear the insignia of a Navy SEAL without ever earning it, their voices full of contempt and laughter, as if the idea of a woman standing among the elite warriors of the nation was something too ridiculous to take seriously. Inside the interrogation chamber, she was forced into a metal chair, her wrists chained to the table. The dim light above her, flickering every few seconds, casting shadows across her face. The officer in charge slammed a folder down in front of her, filled with photographs and documents, proof as they called it that she had falsified her identity and forged her way into restricted areas. Yet she did not flinch, her lips pressed together in silence, her eyes unwavering and cold, as if she knew something they did not, as if she carried knowledge too heavy for them to imagine. The officers grew restless as they questioned her, demanding to know her real name, demanding to know who had sent her and what her plan was. They sneered at her silence, telling her the charade would not last long, telling her that they would strip her of every lie until nothing was left. She remained calm, her breathing steady, as if their threats were nothing more than background noise, her stillness unnerving them more than any outburst could ever have done. The room beginning to feel smaller with every second, her silence. Stretched across the air, one of the younger interrogators leaned forward, his voice low and sharp, accusing her of dishonoring the sacrifices of real soldiers, accusing her of making a mockery of the Brotherhood of the SEALs, his words heavy with anger as if he took her very presence as a personal insult. Still, she gave no answer, only letting her gaze drift down her arm, where beneath the sleeve of the uniform a faint burn scar rested unseen by them all, her fingers brushing lightly against the fabric as if to remind herself of its presence, a secret mark from a night burned into her memory, a mark no imposter could ever hope to carry. The silence began to unnerve the others. Whispers rose among them that maybe she was not a fraud after all, one officer pointing out that she had been found not wandering in civilian clothes, but on a secure perimeter as if she belonged there, as if she had known exactly where to step and how to avoid detection until the guards had caught her by chance. Another officer argued that she knew too much. Her uniform matched specifications down to details. Few outside classified circles would ever see their words clashing in doubt, as the woman sat motionless, letting their uncertainty grow. Commanding officer slammed his fist on the table, silencing the room, his voice echoing against the steel walls as he demanded she speak at once. He told her lies were easy to maintain until someone powerful enough broke them. He leaned close, his face inches from hers, his eyes burning with suspicion, yet she did not blink. She whispered a few words so quiet they barely reached his ears, words that hinted at places he himself had only heard in rumor, places where missions were carried out. Without recognition, where names of the dead were erased from history, the officer recoiled, staring at her as if she had peeled back a curtain he had never wanted to see behind. The atmosphere in the chamber shifted unease, settling into the men who, only moments ago, had mocked her, the weight of what she said impossible for any ordinary pretender to know each man, exchanging glances of doubt, wondering if they had made a mistake. They pressed her again for answers, but her lips closed once more, refusing to give them the satisfaction, her silence now no longer defiance but a weapon. Each second it stretched, making them doubt more, the shadows on the wall seeming to grow darker as the storm outside rattled the windows. One of the officers stormed out of the room, muttering that this matter had gone beyond their rank, that someone higher needed to see her, that perhaps they were sitting with more than just a criminal. The others followed him out, leaving the commanding officer alone. With the woman, his eyes fixed on her arm as if sensing that something hidden beneath the sleeve would explain the dread curling in his chest. He wanted to tear the fabric open to reveal the truth, but something in her stare held him frozen. His hand trembling as it hovered above the chain connecting her wrist to the table. As the minutes stretched into hours, the sound of boots echoed in the corridor outside, heavier and slower than before the door swung open, revealing not another officer, but the silhouette of a man whose uniform carried more weight than any of them. The guards snapped to attention, their voices stiff as they announced the arrival of a general. His presence unexpected and heavy, the air itself seemed to tighten. The woman lifted her head, her eyes locking with his as if she had been waiting for this very moment. The room held its breath as the general stepped forward, his eyes narrowing on her with recognition he could not yet voice. The general stood in the doorway, his boots echoing with a weight that silenced every whisper in the room. The officers who had mocked the woman earlier now looked uneasy, as if their confidence had been ripped away. The general's gaze remained fixed on her, his eyes narrowing. As if struggling to reconcile what he saw with a memory long buried, he said nothing at first, only walked slowly to the chair across from her, each step deliberate, heavy, the air thick with anticipation as the woman sat chained to the table unmoved by his presence. The interrogator straightened, trying to explain that she was a fraud, that she had been caught impersonating a seal. But the general raised his hand, silencing them with a single gesture, his voice calm but carrying authority that none dared question. He asked them to leave the room at once, and they obeyed, their faces pale with confusion and fear until only the general and the woman remained in the chamber, the storm outside beating harder against the walls as if nature itself anticipated what was about to unfold. For the first time since her capture, the woman lifted her sleeve, slowly, revealing the faint scar burned into her flesh. The general froze, his body rigid as if struck by lightning, his eyes locked onto the mark that no ordinary person could bear. For it was the mark of a unit that had been erased from records, a unit that was believed destroyed years ago in a mission classified so deeply that even most generals were never told the full truth. He leaned back in his chair, his face drained of color, his hands trembling slightly as he whispered a name known only to a handful of survivors, a code meant to confirm loyalty among ghosts. The woman answered without hesitation, her words sharp, precise, carrying the weight of memory and blood. Her tone void of emotion, yet filled with a truth that could not be faked. Her reply struck the general like a blade, cutting through every doubt in his mind. He knew instantly she was not a fraud. She was not an actress seeking attention. She was one of them, one of the few who had lived through the kind of nightmare that could never be told in reports or speeches. He pressed his lips together, fighting to remain composed, though the tremor in his hand betrayed the storm rising within him. He demanded to know how she had survived that night, how she had walked away when the rest of her team had been declared lost. She stared at him silently for a long moment, her eyes dark as if staring through him rather than at him. Then she spoke words that chilled the air. She spoke of betrayal from within, the chain of command, of orders altered at the last moment, of an ambush too precise to be chance. She described watching her brothers fall one by one, her voice steady as if each death replayed behind her eyes. The general swallowed hard, each detail striking chords he did not want to hear. The woman revealed how she had been hunted ever since by shadows that wore uniforms like his men, how every trace of her existence had been erased from military records, her name struck from rosters, her identity burned away until only she remained carrying the scar that could not be scrubbed from flesh. She had wandered in silence, living under false names, until finally she returned, not to expose herself, but to confront the truth hidden within the very walls. She now sat chained inside the general, felt the walls closing in as if the secrets of the past had been waiting for this confrontation. He rose from his chair, pacing the room, his hands clasped behind his back as he demanded to know who had given the order, who had orchestrated the betrayal. She lifted her chin, her eyes unflinching as she told him she did not know, not yet, but she had. Followed trails of whispers and fragments of classified files, and all roads led back to powerful figures cloaked in stars on their shoulders, men who would kill to keep the truth buried. She leaned forward, her chains rattling softly as she declared that if she had to, she would drag the truth into the light with or without his help. The general turned sharply, his breath heavy as he considered the weight of her words. His loyalty torn between duty to command and the oath he had sworn to his men to never abandon them, to never let their sacrifices be forgotten. His silence stretched long, heavy, until finally he faced her again and asked why she had come now. After all these years, she closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength, before revealing that the same people who betrayed her unit had set their eyes on another mission, one already in motion, one that would end in blood unless stopped. Her words cut through him like fire, for he recognized the operation she spoke of, a mission under his oversight, a mission he believed secure and just. Her warning implied otherwise, that the same hand that orchestrated her unit's death was poised to strike again. Only this time, the cost would be even higher. He clenched his jaw, his eyes burning with a conflict he could not show, the weight of responsibility pressing against his chest until it felt difficult to breathe. He realized that every choice he made from this moment would ripple through lives he might never meet. He leaned over the table, his voice lowered to a whisper, demanding she tell him everything she knew, every fragment, every coded whisper, every thread she had gathered. In her years of hiding, her eyes locked onto his, her voice unwavering as she began to speak of names whispered in safe houses, of movements tracked across continents, of assassinations disguised as accidents. Her words painting a map of betrayal that reached farther and deeper than either of them had imagined. With each revelation, the general's face darkened, his silence no longer of disbelief, but of grim understanding. The chains on her wrists rattled as she shifted closer, her voice gaining strength, as she told him she had returned not to beg for freedom, not to clear her name, but to warn him that he stood at the edge of a blade, that those who orchestrated her downfall would not hesitate to turn on him when his usefulness was done. Her words left no room for doubt. Her presence itself, proof that their reach was long but not perfect, for she had survived against all odds, and her survival was a threat they had not accounted for. The general stared at her scar again, the mark that had frozen him now burning like fire in his mind. Before he could answer, the door burst open, the officers who had left earlier storming back into the chamber, their faces pale, their voices urgent as they reported that the base had just received a coded transmission, a warning that an infiltration had already begun. Their eyes darted between the woman and the general, unsure of what connected them, but certain that something was unfolding beyond their control. The general straightened his uniform, his face hardening into the mask of command as he turned back to the woman, his decision heavy in his silence, yet inevitable in the fire of his gaze. The storm outside grew worse as the coded transmission spread tension through the entire base. Soldiers running through the halls, radios buzzing with static-filled orders, boots striking against concrete in rapid rhythm, the air itself electric with dread inside the chamber. The general stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the woman who still sat, chained, her scarred arm resting on the table, her expression unreadable, yet her silence heavier than any words. The officers looked to him for instruction, their hands twitching near their holsters, unsure if she was prisoner or ally. The room trembling with anticipation as the general finally spoke, commanding the chains be removed. The guards hesitated, their eyes darting in confusion, yet the general's voice carried an authority that could not be questioned. Reluctantly, they unfastened the locks, the chains clattering onto the steel table as the woman slowly lifted her arms, rubbing her wrists. She did not thank them. She only stood tall. Her posture that of someone who had carried far greater burdens in silence. The officers shifted. Uneasily, their earlier insults echoing in their minds, replaced now with doubt and fear. The general studied her as if trying to measure whether she was the weapon they needed or the storm that could destroy them. She began to speak her words. Calm, steady as she described how the infiltration they now feared was no accident. It had been set in motion long before her capture. She had intercepted fragments of chatter across borders, whispers in forgotten corners of war zones and safe houses, and now it was here unfolding under their feet. She told them this was not about a single mission, or even a single base, but about the control of power itself, hidden hands steering outcomes of wars and conflicts for their own profit and dominion, her. Words burned with a clarity that silenced every doubt, and yet the officers looked at each other as if struggling to comprehend the depth of the betrayal. The general leaned on the table, his jaw tight, his mind racing as he weighed her revelations. Against his own knowledge, he remembered reports over the years, strange inconsistencies, deaths marked as accidents, missions that ended too perfectly or too disastrously, and now all those threads seemed to weave into the web she described. He asked her how far it reached, how high in the chain of command the betrayal climbed. She paused, her eyes narrowing, before she answered with a name that sent a jolt of shock through the room, a name no one expected to hear, spoken aloud. The officers gasped, one muttering that the accusation was impossible, that the man she named was untouchable. A decorated figure praised as a hero in every circle. The general's face hardened his silence, giving no room for denial. He already suspected long ago that something about the man's rise had been too smooth, too clean. And now, hearing her words, the suspicions he had buried deep clawed their way to the surface. He asked her what proof she carried. What evidence could pierce the armor of a man so shielded by rank and reputation? She lifted her sleeve higher, showing the scar again, her voice steady as she said, her survival was the first piece of proof. The chamber trembled with the weight of her words as she explained how only someone of immense power could have orchestrated the betrayal of her unit, how only someone untouchable could erase every record of their existence and yet fail to erase her entirely, her very presence, proof that the operation had cracks, proof that the truth could not be fully buried. She said that others had seen pieces of the puzzle, men and women who vanished soon after whispering fragments to her, before they disappeared forever. Her voice low as she declared that some of those fragments pointed directly to the man she had just named. The general paced his mind, caught between two crushing forces, loyalty to the command structure he had sworn to obey, and loyalty to the soldiers who had given their lives for the nation he felt the eyes of. The officers on him waiting for a decision, waiting for orders. He turned sharply, his eyes blazing as he told them that if what she said was true, then they were not merely guarding a base. They were standing on the front lines of a hidden war that had already claimed countless lives without anyone knowing. She watched him, her eyes unwavering, her silence once more. A blade sharper than steel. A sudden knock rattled the chamber door, followed by a soldier bursting in, his voice strained as he reported unusual movement detected near the perimeter, multiple figures moving through the storm, their positions shifting with uncanny coordination. The general barked orders at once, sending squads to secure the perimeter, his voice strong and unshaken, though inside his chest, the weight of suspicion and betrayal churned like fire. He turned back to the woman, his eyes sharp as he asked if this was part of the infiltration she had warned about. She gave a single nod, her face unreadable, yet certain, her words chilling, as she told him the infiltration had already begun. The general's heart pounded with the realization that time had run out. The enemy was no longer a whisper or a shadow, but was now pressing against their very gates. He ordered the officers to arm themselves and prepare for combat. His voice cutting through fear, like a blade. The woman stepped forward unchained, her posture steady, her gaze locked on him as she told him she knew their methods, knew the patterns they would use to slip past defenses because she had seen them before in the mission that had ended her unit. She told him that if they were to survive, he would need her knowledge, her skills, her scars. The officers exchanged nervous glances, whispering objections that she could not be trusted, that she was still a prisoner, still a question mark. The general silenced them with a roar, his authority shaking the room as he declared that she was not a prisoner anymore. She was the only one who could guide them through the storm. His decision final. The officers swallowed their fear and obeyed, though doubt still lingered in their eyes. The woman said nothing. She only picked up a weapon handed reluctantly to her by one of the guards. Her grip, steady, her eyes burning with a determination that made even hardened soldiers step back. As the alarms began to blare, the base plunged into organized chaos, soldiers rushing to defensive positions, the sound of thunder merging with the roar of engines, and gunfire in the distance. The woman moved with precision. Each step calculated, each turn familiar, as if she had walked these corridors 1,000 times before. The general followed her, watching how the men who moments ago doubted her now, instinctively, mirrored her movements, trusting her instincts, even as they struggled with the fear that she might lead them into a trap. She stopped suddenly, raising her hand for silence. The corridor falling still, her head tilted, as if listening to a sound only she could hear. She whispered that they were already inside. The enemy had breached faster than expected. Her voice carrying certainty that froze the blood of every man around her. The general ordered immediate lockdown, but before the words could finish, a distant explosion shook the compound. The lights flickered, the floor trembling as dust fell from the ceiling. The soldiers staggered, catching themselves against the walls, weapons raised as the storm outside screamed louder. The woman's eyes burned as she turned to the general, telling him this was only the beginning and that the real strike had yet to come. Her words cut through the chaos, leaving a silence heavier than the thunder as the general stared at her, knowing that every step forward would drag them deeper into the truth that had already claimed so many lives. The scar on her arm, now not just a mark of survival, but a warning of what awaited them if they failed to uncover the betrayal at its heart. Smoke filled the corridors of the base, the echoes of the explosion still rolling through the air. The soldiers scrambled into defensive positions, their weapons raised, eyes darting through the shadows as the storm outside roared against the walls. The woman moved like she had done this countless times, her boots hitting the floor in rhythm, her gaze scanning every doorway and every corner. The general followed close behind, his voice cutting through the confusion as he issued orders. But even he found himself watching her every move, as if she already knew where the enemy would strike next. She led them down a narrow hallway, stopping suddenly as if struck by a memory, her hand pressed against the wall, her breathing steady as she whispered that this was how it began for her unit years ago. The same patterns, the same distraction explosions on the edge to draw attention, while the true strike hit from within. Her words chilled the soldiers, their grips tightening on their rifles. The general clenched his jaw, knowing her warning could not be dismissed, her scarred arm visible under the flickering light, a mark of survival that demanded trust in the face of fear. The sound of gunfire erupted ahead, a sharp, violent burst that cut through the storm. The soldiers rushed forward, only to find two of their own men down, their uniforms soaked in blood, their eyes staring blankly into nothing. The air heavy with gunpowder. The general felt his chest tighten as he realized the infiltration was not just from outside, but from within. His men looked at each other with suspicion, their loyalty shaken by the possibility of traitors in their midst. The woman crouched beside one of the fallen, her fingers brushing across his vest, Before she shook her head, her voice low as she said the shots were not from friendly weapons. Her words left a silence that pressed into their minds like ice. The soldiers shifted uneasily, but followed as she guided them further into the compound, her voice sharp and sure, directing them into positions that revealed ambushers waiting in the shadows, her instincts saving them from being cut down in the crossfire, her every command precise and ruthless. The general watched the men obey, her though moments before they had doubted her existence. Now they clung to her presence as if she were the only compass in a storm that threatened to swallow them whole. The deeper they went, the more the woman spoke of betrayals past her words, cold as she described how her unit had walked into the same type of trap, believing themselves secure, only to discover the enemy already inside their camp, already moving among them. She spoke of a commander who had spoken with the same calm voice, as their own officers here, yet sent them marching into death, her voice steady, but her eyes burning with the memory of fire and blood, her tone heavy with a promise that she would not let history repeat itself, not while she still carried breath. General pulled her aside, his voice low, demanding she tell him more about the name she had spoken in the chamber before the explosion. The man whose reputation loomed untouchable. The woman stared at him, her silence stretching before she spoke of files she had seen, fragments hidden in places where no ordinary spy would look, names encoded in missions, scrubbed clean. Her words laced with a warning that speaking the truth aloud was enough to draw death upon them both. The general's face hardened, his heart pounding as he realized the betrayal reached deeper than even she had dared to believe, and that confronting it would ignite a fire too large to extinguish. Before he could press further, the ground shook again. Another explosion. Closer this time, the corridor filling with smoke as shouts rang out, orders clashed with panic. The woman seized a rifle from one of the men, her movements fluid and practiced. The general did not stop her. He only watched as she advanced into the haze, her silhouette sharp against the red glow of emergency lights. She fired once, twice, the sound echoing until two figures collapsed from the smoke, their weapons clattering to the floor, their uniforms marked with the same insignia as the dead. Men before traitors walking among the loyal. The revelation crushed the men who witnessed it, their faith in the chain of command collapsing as they realized the enemy was not just outside their walls, but within their very ranks. Their trust in the uniforms around them shattered. The woman's voice cut through the despair, commanding them to trust not appearances but actions. Her eyes blazing as she declared that only loyalty tested under fire meant anything. Now her words struck them harder than any bullet, their doubts reshaping into resolve as they closed ranks around her. The general silently watching as the authority he had commanded by rank now belonged to her through survival. They pressed deeper until they reached the command center. The doors sealed the interior, lights flickering with life. The general entered first, only to stop cold, his eyes widening at the sight inside. Several officers lay slumped over consoles, their throats cut clean, their blood pooling on the floor. The screens still alive with tactical maps showing the infiltration routes, as if the enemy wanted them to see their own downfall. The woman stepped past him, her eyes narrowing as she examined the maps, her voice sharp as she told them this was not just an attack. It was a purge meant to erase witnesses and clear the way for something greater. Her words sent a chill through the men, their eyes darting nervously across the screens as if the maps might reveal more than just positions, as if they might uncover the hand of the man who orchestrated it all. The general demanded she show him what she saw in the patterns, and she leaned closer, pointing out routes that bypassed defenses too perfectly, as if the attackers already had clearance. Codes, as if they already knew every weak point. Her tone bitter as she said that only someone with power from within the highest level could feed such information to the enemy. The general's fists clenched, his breath shaking as he realized the truth he had avoided could no longer be denied. The betrayal reached into the very heart of command. Someone high above had turned the nation's own defenses against itself. The woman stepped closer, her eyes fixed on him as she warned that if he hesitated now, the men they both served would die without even knowing why, her scar burning in the dim light as a reminder of what hesitation cost. He nodded slowly, his resolve hardening, his voice steady as he told her he would not allow history to repeat, even if it meant standing against those above him. Suddenly a voice crackled through the comms, a calm, familiar tone belonging to the very man she had accused earlier. His words smooth as he announced that reinforcements were coming to secure the base, his tone dripping with authority and reassurance. Yet beneath it, both she and the general heard something else, a faint edge of control, a command that masked something darker. Her eyes locked with the general's, and without speaking, both understood this was not salvation arriving, but the hand of the betrayal itself, preparing to close around them. The silence between them, heavy with the choice they now faced. The general turned back to his men, his voice loud, commanding them to prepare for what was to come, but not to trust every uniform that entered through those gates. His words met with confusion, but also with resolve as they tightened their ranks, their weapons ready. The woman moved beside him, her rifle steady, her scarred arm visible as if daring the unseen enemy to remember what they had failed to erase years ago. Her presence a symbol of survival, her silence now heavier than any oath as she prepared for the storm about to break. And in the distance, the thunder roared louder, the sound of engines approaching through the storm, the promise of reinforcements that could either save them or doom them. As the woman whispered that the moment of truth had arrived, the general felt the weight of history pressing down upon him, his decision now carrying not only the fate of his men, but the fate of every truth buried beneath the betrayal they were about to confront.